By the time the shadows had climbed halfway up the stands and the lamps around the Quidditch pitch had been lit one by one, the maze no longer looked like a sporting challenge. It looked like something patient and carnivorous that had agreed, for one evening only, to hold still while a crowd admired it. Harry Potter stood with the other champions on the trampled grass and felt the fine dampness of summer gathering beneath the collar of his robes. The walls of the maze loomed black-green and glossy, their clipped edges so exact that they seemed less grown than carved. When the wind passed over them, they did not rustle like ordinary hedges. They whispered together in a low, vegetable hiss that seemed to travel from one end of the pitch to the other and back again, as if the whole labyrinth were taking a single long breath. The noise of the spectators came in waves and never quite reached him. He saw mouths open, teeth flash, hands clap, but all of it seemed to break on the edge of the field and fall short. His world had narrowed to torchlight damp earth, the polished cup gleaming somewhere in the darkness beyond those walls, and the erratic thud of his own heart. Beside him, Cedric Diggory rolled his shoulders once as though loosening them before a match. In the golden spill from the nearest torch, his face looked older than 17, all clean lines and concentration. But when he turned to Harry, there was something simple and steady in his expression that made Harry like him all over again. "Ready?" Cedric asked. Harry let out a breath that wanted to be a laugh and failed. "Not especially." Cedric's mouth twitched. "Good. Thought it was only me." Somewhere behind them, Bagman's voice carried in a burst of enchantment, buoyant and artificial and a little desperate, describing dangers the audience could not see and victory none of them could guarantee. Fleur Delacour stood several paces away, pale in the torchlight, chin tilted, silver blonde hair shining like metal. Victor Krum looked carved out of gloom, his heavy shoulders hunched, his face unreadable. There should have been the fourth judge's place, occupied down near the rail with Dumbledore, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff. But Bartemius Crouch's absence hung over the evening, like a missing stare in the dark. Bagman had filled the silence with jokes and explanations, but Harry had not forgotten the look on Dumbledore's face when Crouch's chair remained empty. He glanced up into the stands, not at the sea of strangers, but toward the adults who mattered. Dumbledore stood wrapped in deep blue robes that seemed almost black in the failing light, his silver beard and half-moon spectacles catching the torches. He was not smiling. His hands were folded over the head of his staff, and the stillness of him had about it the quality of a held breath. On the other side of the judge's area stood Moody, his magical eye revolving in restless jerks beneath the scarred ridges of his face. The blue eye fixed on Harry, and held there so intently that Harry felt the look like a touch between his shoulder blades. Moody raised his flask in what might have been encouragement. Harry nodded without thinking. For a queer instant, the old Auror's battered face seemed to sharpen, not into kindness exactly, but into something eager and private. Then the magical eye spun away. At the first blast of the whistle, Fleur darted into the maze with a sweep of silver hair. Krum went next in a silent loping stride. Cedric and Harry were held back for their allotted moments, the delay winding Harry tighter with every second. The world had gone strange and bright around the edges. He became absurdly aware of everything at once. The smell of bruised grass, the dampness on his palms, the scrape of a beetle at the base of a torch post. The way the evening sky above the castle had turned a dark violet with a greenish seam on the horizon where the last of the light clung. Then Bagman shouted his name. Harry stepped forward, ducked through the opening in the hedge, and the world of stands and judges and torches vanished behind him as cleanly as if he had passed through water. Inside, the air was cooler. The noise of the crowd died at once. The path was narrow, the hedges so high they seemed to blot out the sky, though here and there a strip of deepening blue was visible overhead. His trainers sank slightly into the soft ground. Ahead, the passage bent left. Harry tightened his grip on his wand and moved. He had expected danger in flashes. Instead, the first danger was silence. It pressed against his ears. The maze smelled green and raw, with something bitter beneath, as if sap were running somewhere out of sight. He passed the first fork, listened, chose right, and went on. Somewhere far off there came a muffled cry that might have been Bagman's enchanted commentary, or might have been another champion shouting. A shape erupted from the darkness in a violent scuttle of claws and jointed legs. Harry shouted, "Stupefy!" almost before he knew what it was. Red light hit the blast-ended Scrooge sideways, glancing off its shell in a shower of sparks. The creature reared, its stinger whipping over its back, and a gout of flame burst from its rear end, lighting the hedge walls in hellish orange. It charged. Harry threw himself aside, rolled, came up on one knee, and fired again and again until at last the Scroot crashed into the hedge, legs thrashing, and lay still with a smell like singed meat filling the passage. He stayed crouched for a moment with his breath burning in his throat. Then he pushed himself up and went on faster. The maze seemed determined not simply to oppose him but to think around him. Paths that appeared to lead straight bent suddenly. Openings closed where he could have sworn they had been. More than once he had the dizzy sense that the hedges were inching inward behind him, not enough to be seen, only enough to be felt. He came upon a silvery mist hanging low across a stretch of path, and remembering what he had been taught all year, did not rush through it. He charmed a pebble into a hopping thing and sent it in first. The stone sprang at once to the ceiling and clung there. Harry took the long way around. A shriek sounded somewhere to his left, sharp and furious, then ended abruptly. He sent red sparks into the air as high as he could, hoping it was only a champion calling for help and not something worse. The sparks vanished into the leaves overhead without answer. At the next turn, he ran almost straight into Victor Krum. Krum's wand was out. His face was blank in a way faces should never be blank. The pupils of his eyes huge and black in the dim light. "Victor," Harry said, stopping so fast that mud slid beneath one shoe. Krum raised his wand without a word. The curse missed Harry by inches, blasting a fist-sized hole in the hedge. Leaves and twigs sprayed over his shoulder. Harry stared for half a heartbeat, too startled to move. Krum's expression did not change. He raised his wand again with the smooth obedience of a puppet whose strings had been jerked. "Stupefy." Krum crumpled before his spell had fully left the end of his own wand. He landed hard, one arm under him, and did not stir. Harry lowered his wand, his chest heaving. Imperious, he thought at once, with a certainty that made the back of his neck go cold. Krum had not looked angry or frightened. He had looked empty. A muffled groan reached him from farther down a side passage. Harry ran and found Fleur half buried in a tangle of roots where the hedge had buckled strangely inward. Her wand out of reach, eyes shut, her breathing shallow but steady. He sent up another burst of red sparks, this one higher and stronger, and the hiss of them vanishing overhead seemed indecently cheerful in the dark. By the time he backed away from Fleur, another set of footsteps was approaching at a run. Cedric came out of the gloom breathing hard, one sleeve scorched, the front of his robes torn. "I saw the sparks," he said. "What happened?" "Fleur's down there. Krum attacked me. He was onto something, I think. I stunned him." Cedric swore under his breath, quick and incredulous. "I was hit from behind. He nearly got me." For a moment they looked at each other in the green-black light, both of them panting, both of them with their wands up, and some final pretense of this being only a tournament fell away. "This is mad," Cedric said. Harry nodded. "Yeah." The distant hush of the maze thickened around them. Then, from somewhere ahead there came the faintest glimmer of gold. The Triwizard Cup was shining down a straight path perhaps 30 yards away, placed on a plinth of stone at the center of a small circular clearing. It gave off its own light, pale and pure and possibly calm, like moonlight had learned to hold a shape. For a second both boys simply stared at it. Cedric gave a short laugh, not from amusement but relief so sudden it bordered on disbelief. "There it is. You should take it," Harry said at once. "You got here first. I saw you." Cedric turned to him, frowning. "Don't be thick. You told me about the dragons. You gave me the clue about the egg. No. Harry shook his head. You told me about the first task too. We're even. You should have it. Cedric looked past him once, toward the dark from which he had come, as if measuring all that had happened against what either of them might claim to deserve. We take it together, he said abruptly. A tie. Harry opened his mouth to argue and stopped. There was something in Cedric's face, fatigue, pride, fairness, stubbornness, that made refusal seem childish. All right, Harry said. They walked toward the cup side by side, their shoulders nearly touching. The golden handles caught the light. The clearing smelled less green than the rest of the maze, more open somehow, with damp stone and an odd mineral cold rising from the earth. Harry felt, with a tiny twist of unease, that the air here was different. Not dangerous exactly. Charged. Cedric reached first. His hand closed over one handle. Harry put his hand on the other. For the briefest instant, the metal seemed to shiver like something waking. Then the ground vanished from beneath Harry's feet. The clearing, the hedges, the torches, the castle, all of it tore away in a whirl of wind and color. His stomach lurched up into his throat. He heard Cedric shout beside him, felt the handle wrenched against his palm as if the cup meant to take his arm with it, and then the world slammed back. He staggered, knees buckling. The cup clanged onto hard ground between them. They were standing in darkness so complete that for an instant Harry thought they had been blinded. Then shapes began to emerge. A yew tree, with its branches drooping like black hair. Ranks of leaning headstones silvered by a weak moon. A low church spire in the distance like a nail driven into the sky. Cedric straightened first. Where are we? Harry's answer never came. Somewhere beyond the graves, a high, cold voice said, "Kill the spare." Green light flashed. Cedric was thrown backward as though an invisible hand had struck him square in the chest. He hit the earth with a heavy final sound that no falling body should make when life is still inside it. His eyes remained open. They saw nothing. Harry stared. For one impossible heartbeat, the world did not rearrange itself around what he had seen. Cedric was standing beside him. Cedric was on the ground. Cedric had been speaking. Cedric would answer if Harry shouted. Cedric was dead. Then something small and misshapen moved in the darkness ahead, and terror crashed down so hard that thought began again only as instinct. Harry had time for one raw intake of breath before something with a silver hand seized his shoulder and jerked him off his feet. He fought blindly, kicking, twisting, striking out with his wand arm. But the man who dragged him was stronger than fear had made Harry, and fear had made him feral. They crashed through weeds and old grass. Harry smelt stale milk and damp cloth and a rank, rodent smell that seemed to rise from the man's skin. The silver hand closed around Harry's throat with exact unnatural pressure. Not enough to crush, enough to promise it could. And Peter Pettigrew's wet whisper scraped into his ear. Quiet, quiet, quiet now. Harry drove an elbow backward and hit bone. Pettigrew hissed. They stumbled against a tombstone. Harry caught a glimpse of the small shape cradled in the crook of Pettigrew's other arm and wished at once he had not. It looked less like a child than like the memory of one after something unspeakable had happened to it. Hairless, waxy, with a flattened snake-like nose and great gleaming red eyes too alive for the tiny body that contained them. It wore a scrap of dark cloth that made its limbs seem all the thinner. It turned its face toward Harry, and the scar on Harry's forehead burst into pain so fierce and sudden that the graveyard vanished in white fire. He cried out and dropped his wand. "Hold him," said the high voice from that ruined infant mouth. "The bone of the father first." Pettigrew forced Harry down at the foot of a large white marble headstone that bore the name Tom Riddle. Iron bands shot out of the stone at a muttered command and snapped shut around Harry's chest, wrists, and ankles. The marble was cold through his robes. He strained against the bands until they bit and could not move more than an inch. The cauldron stood before him in a clearing of old graves, immense and black and already simmering over a magical fire that threw no ordinary light. Its glow was not orange, but a sickly blue-white, revealing too much and not enough. A yew tree hunched over the scene. Beyond it, the churchyard sloped away toward a cluster of dark houses, and then to the little village Harry had seen once in a dream, though then he had not known what it was. Pettigrew laid the creature down on the grass with a tenderness so warped it made Harry sick. Then he crossed to a grave marked Tom Riddle and knelt beside it. With his own wand, he traced a line in the earth. Soil tore opened. A bone, yellowed and long buried, lifted obediently into the air and dropped into Pettigrew's waiting hand. Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son. He dropped it into the cauldron. The liquid within hissed. Sparks leapt up, white as teeth. Pettigrew's face shone with sweat. His pale hair clung in strings to his temples. He was shaking, but not with reluctance. Harry saw then the terrible thing that had always been hidden under the trembling and the whining. Not only cowardice, but devotion. Pettigrew feared pain, feared death, feared displeasing stronger men. Yet beneath all of that, like rot beneath wallpaper, there was worship. He picked up the small bundle from the grass again, his silver hand supporting it almost delicately. Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master. The knife flashed. Harry had never before heard a grown man scream like that. Pettigrew severed his own right hand and for a second seemed not to believe what he had done. Blood gouted black in the strange light. The silver hand clanged onto the rim of the cauldron, fell in, and vanished. Pettigrew collapsed to his knees, cradling the bleeding stump to his chest, his face gray and sheened with agony. The bundle he had been holding slid from his arm, but the tiny red eyes never closed. They remained fixed on Harry, patient and venomous. Then Pettigrew lurched upright, swaying and stumbled toward Harry. Harry thrashed against the bands, but there was nowhere to go. Pettigrew's ruined arm left blood on the marble as he reached with his good hand and drew a silver dagger across Harry's forearm. It was a shallow cut, quick and bright. Pain flared. Harry gasped. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. A few scarlet drops fell into the cauldron. The liquid inside erupted. The surface changed from pale sparks to a violent boil. Steam billowed out in dense white sheets, swallowing the clearing, wet and scalding and foul with a smell Harry could not at first name. Then he knew it. Grave earth after rain, snake skin, old stone, blood on iron. The marble against his back vibrated as though some vast machine were waking underground. Pettigrew crawled away, moaning, one arm clamped around his severed wrist. Harry could hear the thing that had been Voldemort making a thin, eager sound from somewhere within the steam. Almost a laugh. The cauldron blazed suddenly, too bright to look at. The steam drew inward instead of out, sucked back in ribbons to its mouth. A tall shape was rising from the potion. It stepped over the rim. Harry had seen Tom Riddle in a memory, and knew that he had once been handsome. The thing that stood now in the clearing had been built out of that vanished beauty, and then remade by hatred into something lovelier and more terrible than a human face had any right to be. He was very tall and unnaturally thin, his skin whiter than the bone that had birthed him, his skull bare, his features sharpened into a cruel economy. Slits for nostrils, red eyes beneath lids without warmth, a mouth both delicate and pitiless. The long fingers he lifted before his own face were spider-pale and elegant. When he smiled, it was not at himself but at the world for having failed to keep him dead. "Robe me," he said softly. Pettigrew staggered forward, clutching a bundle of black robes in his remaining hand, his breath coming in ragged sobs. He fastened the robe around his master's shoulders with clumsy devotion. Voldemort stood very still while the cloth settled over him, so still he might have been allowing the night itself to dress him. Then he touched Harry's cut arm with the tip of one finger. The pain in Harry's scar became unbearable. He cried out again, helplessly, and the cold finger left his skin. "Ah," Voldemort said. "Blood of my enemy, but within it now a bond. You see, Harry Potter, I can touch you now." He said Harry's name the way another man might say a title he had finally won. Pettigrew sank to the ground, sweating and half delirious, his stump wrapped in filthy cloth. Voldemort glanced down at him with something almost like distaste. Then, with a flick of his wand, he conjured a shining silver hand and fitted it to Pettigrew's wrist. The fingers flexed once, terrible in their smooth perfection. "May your loyalty never waver again, Wormtail?" Pettigrew bent double, pressing his forehead to the grass. "Never, my lord. Never." Harry dragged a breath into his lungs and forced himself to look away from the red eyes, to search the ground. His wand lay perhaps 6 feet from him, black against darker grass, obscenely unreachable. Beyond it, Cedric's body lay on its back among the graves, one hand flung open as if it had simply let go of the world. The sight pierced Harry with such sudden grief that the fear in him changed shape. It did not lessen. It sharpened. Voldemort turned, listening. Somewhere beyond the churchyard, very far off and very faint, a dog barked. A window in one of the village houses glimmered and went dark. The moon slipped from behind a cloud and silvered the rows of stones. "The old world sleeps," Voldemort murmured, and spread his long fingers. "Wake them!" He touched the dark mark on Pettigrew's arm. The brand went red-black as if hot iron had been pressed to flesh. At once Harry knew what it was, not by sight but by the way the night itself seemed to tense in answer. A flare of pain echoed across distances he could not imagine. Voldemort closed his eyes briefly, savoring it. When he opened them again, their red gleam had deepened. "They will come," he said. "Those who feared me, those who abandoned me, those who pretended to themselves that I was only a memory. Tonight they remember." "None." He drifted away from the cauldron and began walking among the graves with a languid grace that made Harry think hideously of a snake moving through long grass. He paused sometimes to look at a name carved in stone. He laid one hand on the marble of his father's grave and smiled without affection. Harry's wrists burned where the iron bands held them. He thought wildly of shouting, of pleading, of distracting Pettigrew and rolling free somehow, though there was no somehow in sight. He had never in his life felt so young. Everything at Hogwarts, every duel, every detention, every Quidditch match, every narrow escape seemed to shrink to the dimensions of schoolboy things. In the face of this white man among the graves and the certainty that no teacher, no friend, no parent was near enough to matter. Yet even in that terror, his mind kept throwing up details with cruel clarity. The dampness sinking through the knees of his robes, the motionless fringe over Cedric's brow, the clotted blood on Pettigrew's hand, the shape of the Yule leaves moving in the breeze, the way Voldemort's shadow was thinner than a man's should be. Then there were cracks in the dark. Soft at first, then louder. Apparition. Figures appeared one by one between the headstones, masked and hooded, bowing, kneeling, faltering. Some came at once as if they had been waiting by their fireplaces or doors for years with cloaks in hand. Others arrived moments later, breathing hard, the distance from their ordinary lives still clinging to them in absurd details, one with a smear of candle wax on his sleeve, another with wine staining his cuff. Yet each, the instant he saw the pale figure by the cauldron, dropped to his knees. White masks turned toward Harry, toward the body, toward the risen Dark Lord, and then lowered in fear. The circle was closing. They knelt in a widening ring around him, black robes darkening the grass, masks pale as skulls in the moonlight. Their deference was so immediate, so absolute, that Harry felt for the first time the full weight of what had returned. At school, Voldemort had always been story and threat and inherited nightmare. Here he was not only present but obeyed, and the obedience of these men altered the very air. It made the graveyard into a court. Voldemort moved into the center of the circle as though he had never been absent from it. "Rise." The Death Eaters obeyed with the rustle of cloth and the clink of wand handles against belt buckles. Harry knew several of them even through the masks. One man's white blonde hair slipped like silk over the collar of his hood, Lucius Malfoy. Another stood broad and brutish beside him, with the shape of Crabbe or Goyle in the set of his shoulders. There was McNair, too, unmistakable in the butcher's heaviness of him, though he had put on finery to kneel in. Avery stood near the back, thin and fox-like even beneath the robes. Knott's narrow hands flexed once at his sides. More were there than names Harry could place, men who had passed in and out of ministry corridors, or sat in the good seats at Quidditch matches, or nodded to one another in Diagon Alley, as though they belonged to the respectable world. Voldemort's gaze drifted from face to face with terrible intimacy. "So," he said softly, "here we are, 12 years and more, and still some of you can be found when pain reminds you whose servants you are." No one answered. Lucius Malfoy, who had risen half a second faster than the others, bowed deeply. "My lord, we have awaited your call." Awaited. Voldemort tasted the word. A comfortable verb, like resting, like dining, like talking in warm drawing rooms while my body lay less than spirit, less than memory. Malfoy did not straighten. "We thought you gone. We hoped." "Did you?" Voldemort said. The pause that followed was not long. It did not need to be. Malfoy dropped to one knee so quickly the wet grass splashed his robe. Around the circle others moved too, fear passing through them like a current. "My lord," Malfoy said, voice gone dry, "I never cease to be yours." A soft laugh moved through Voldemort's nostrils and died there. "Of course, each of you has prepared a story. How faithfully you watched for signs. How cleverly you hid yourselves to serve me when I rose. How prudent you were to preserve your liberty, your estates, your influence. I know your stories. I have heard them in dreams while your children slept safely in the beds you kept by betraying me." No one moved. "Stand," Voldemort said again. "Tonight I have no leisure for punishing old cowardice one betrayal at a time." That caused a flicker of relief so naked on several masked faces that Harry almost pitied them. Almost. Voldemort turned slightly, enough that Harry could see the profile of his skull-smooth head against the graves. "Some of my faithful are absent. One is at Hogwarts, and has already done more for me in a year than certain richer men did in 12. Some are in Azkaban, where the Ministry congratulates itself on keeping them for me. Some have deserted me beyond reclaiming. They will be dealt with in time." And his red eyes rested on Harry then and brightened. "The boy has seen and heard. Good. Let him carry what we permit him to carry." Harry's mouth had gone dry. He stared back, refusing to lower his eyes, though his whole body shook with effort and fear. Voldemort smiled. "Do you understand, Harry? Tonight is not the end of my concealment. It is the beginning of my patience paying interest." He stepped closer to the Death Eaters, and when he spoke next, his voice did not rise. It became more dangerous precisely because it softened, drawing every man toward it. "The Ministry is a house with many doors and no stomach for blood. For months avenues have been prepared. A whispered favor here, a delayed report there, a man with debts, another with ambition, a fireplace left unguarded, a watch schedule copied, a clerk persuaded to think a superior's voice has authority when it is only charm work. They are already weak. Tonight we teach them that weakness is merely the first stage of obedience." McNair's head lifted a fraction. Avery's fingers twitched with something like hunger. Malfoy, still kneeling, said carefully, "My lord, at once. Did you imagine I came back to slink in forests and wait upon newspapers?" Voldemort asked. "Cornelius Fudge has built his comfort on disbelief. That is a seam we may enter with a needle. The old fool has just been handed truth from a boy's bleeding mouth. He will deny it. He will deny it because denial is the only wall left between him and terror. While he denies, we enter his house. While he clings to office, we fasten our hand around the workings beneath it. By dawn, Britain will still have a ministry of magic." He looked around the circle and the faintest contemptuous amusement touched his mouth. "It will simply belong to me." The silence after that was not the silence of fear, but of awe. Harry saw it happen to them, the shift from anxious reunion to belief. Men who had come uncertain whether they were kneeling to a restored tyrant or a temporarily dangerous ghost now understood that they were being offered victory in the old language they loved best. Power without public accountability, cruelty signed in triplicate, terror administered through institutions, polite enough to wear robes and seals. "You," Voldemort said, and his wand indicated McNair. "Level 4 knows you. The servants' corridors and lower lifts are yours. Open the path to law enforcement." McNair bowed his head. "Yes, my lord." Avery die. Mulciber. Imperious who must be imperious. Kill who must be killed, and do not waste curses on the timid if obedience will suffice. Num. Esha. Nazi. Gao. Ain. Ko. Xiu. Ko. The named men murmured assent. "Lucius, the minister trusts your voice because he mistakes wealth for stability. Preserve him if possible. I prefer a frightened mouthpiece to a corpse. If he proves inconvenient, we shall replace him with whomever his underlings already obey out of habit." Malfoy bowed more deeply. "It will be done." Wormtail. Pettigrew nearly kissed the hem of the black robe. "My lord? You will remain. If the boy lives long enough to tell his tale, let him tell only what serves me." "Me." Harry understood then that Voldemort meant him to survive, at least briefly. Not out of mercy, out of strategy. He was to be the spark flung into a room already full of gas. The truth no one would accept until it had become useful to the liar in power. And because Voldemort wanted that, because he was vain enough to play with outcomes he believed mastered, Harry felt a sudden, desperate hope. If he lived another minute, another 30 seconds, there might still be a chance. Voldemort had moved back in front of him. "Before my servants go," he said almost lazily, "they shall witness the fall of the boy who escaped me. We would not have the night begin without ceremony." He cut Harry free from the tombstone with a flick of his wand, then conjured ropes that bound Harry's arms but left him standing. Harry swayed on legs gone numb, and did not fall only because pride was all that held him up. "Bow to death, Harry," Voldemort whispered. Harry did not bow. Voldemort's eyes narrowed with pleasure rather than anger. "As you wish. Give him his wand." "May." Pettigrew snatched Harry's wand from the grass and thrust it into his hand. Harry's fingers closed around the familiar wood so fiercely it hurt. The circle widened. Black-robed figures withdrew among the stones. Cedric's body lay just beyond them, intolerably still. "Do me," Voldemort said. Harry heard someone in the circle draw a sharp breath as though in delight. Voldemort raised his own wand, the U1 with the phoenix feather at its core, and Harry knew, not from Ollivander's words long ago alone, but from the way his own wand had begun to tremble, that something old and dangerous bound the two pieces of wood together. "On the count of 3, Voldemort said. 1, 2, 3. Avada Kedavra. Expelliarmus." Green light and red light collided in midair and did not pass through each other. Instead, a golden thread connected the two wands, as though both had been tethered by molten metal. Voldemort's face changed, not to fear, not yet, but to astonishment so violent it stripped him of expression. Harry dug his feet into the wet earth and held on with every shred of strength in him. The connection thickened. Beads of brilliant light began to move along it, slipping toward Harry's wand, then stuttering back toward Voldemort's, as if the two wands were fighting through their masters to decide which remembered its twin more fiercely. The Death Eaters shouted. Someone cried, "My lord! Do not break the connection!" Voldemort hissed, though whether to himself or to Harry, Harry could not tell. The nearest bead touched Voldemort's wand. The wand began to emit shapes. At first, Harry did not understand what he was seeing. A hand, a curl of smoke, a body folding out of the wand tip as though the spell itself were giving birth to its dead. Then a man was standing between them, not solid, not ghost, but luminous and gray. He looked old and bewildered, his face folded into the lines of age and surprise. Frank Bryce, Harry realized with a sick twist. The old caretaker from the dream. Frank turned his head, took in the graveyard with dreadful composure, and moved aside. Another figure came. A woman. Bertha Jorkins. whose picture Harry had seen in the paper. She looked at Voldemort with loathing that shone through death. Then, Cedric. Harry made a sound he did not know he could make. Cedric's shade was more substantial than mist, less than flesh. His face calm in a way the face on the ground had not been. He looked at Harry, and the old easy fairness of him remained even here. "Hold on," Cedric said. "We'll give you time. Get back to the cup." "No." Voldemort's wand bucked in his hand. The golden connection pulsed. Then James Potter emerged, spectral and young, and so unlike the photographs, yet so utterly his father that Harry's knees nearly failed him. Lily followed a heartbeat later, her hair a shining red haze around a face Harry knew only from dreams and from the mirror that showed what one most desired. The world contracted. The graveyard, the Death Eaters, the killing curse, all of it dimmed around the impossible fact of them. "Your mother's coming," James had said in the maze of memory once. Now she was there. "Harry," Lily said, and there was no time in her voice, no death in it, only fierce and immediate love. The bead closest to Harry's wand was beginning to slide toward him. He felt his strength fray. "When the connection breaks," James said quickly, "run. Don't hesitate. Take Cedric," Cedric's shade said. "Bring my body back to my parents." Harry could not speak. He nodded. The ghosts moved closer to Voldemort, not touching him, not able perhaps, yet crowding him with witness. Voldemort recoiled a step in pure revulsion. That one step was enough. Harry wrenched his wand sideways with all the strength left in him. The golden thread snapped. At once the shades surged in a pale storm between Harry and Voldemort. The Death Eaters shouted, blinded or thrown back by the sudden burst of silver light. Harry spun, ran, slipped on the wet grass, nearly fell over Cedric's body, hauled Cedric up under the arms, and staggered toward the cup. The cup seemed impossibly far away, though it lay only yards from the riddled grave. Curses scorched the air behind him. One burst a headstone into stone shrapnel that slashed his cheek. Pettigrew's silver hand snatched at his cloak and missed. Harry saw the cup handle glint. "Harry!" Voldemort screamed, and the fury in the name was so inhuman that it seemed to tear the night. Harry flung himself forward and caught the handle of the Triwizard cup with one hand, while the other still clutched Cedric's robes. The graveyard vanished. This time the return was worse. Harry hit the ground hard enough to lose his breath. The cup skidded across turf. Cedric's body collapsed beside him with a limpness Harry could feel even through the shock that was splintering his thoughts. The night air of Hogwarts, warm, familiar, summer-soft, struck his face. For a second he could not understand why it should smell of cut grass and smoke from torches rather than grave mold and potion. Then screams started. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the stands, from the judge's area, from Bagman somewhere very close, from Mrs. Diggory already running before she could possibly have known anything, and yet knowing everything. Harry tried to sit up. His arm was slick with blood. His scar was still burning. He heard himself yelling, "He's back! Voldemort's back! Cedric's dead!" Hand seized him. He flinched violently, wand raised, and found Dumbledore above him, faster than any old man had a right to be. Blue eyes turned into points of hard light behind the spectacles. Beside him were McGonagall, white-faced and fierce, and Bagman, who had gone the color of curdled milk. "Take Diggory!" Dumbledore snapped, and the command cut through the bedlam like steel. "Harry, stay with me." But Harry could not stay with anyone. Cedric's father had reached them. Amos Diggory's cry when he saw his son was the kind of sound that altered whatever heard it. The pitch, the maze, the castle looming beyond, the summer night itself, everything seemed to flinch. Harry found himself hauled upright, then guided, then propelled. He thought it was Dumbledore until he realized it was Moody. Moody with the magical eye whirling and his gnarled hand clamped so hard around Harry's arm that bruises would rise later. "Come on," Moody growled. "Come on, Potter. You need to get away from this lot. Need to hear what happened." Harry stumbled after him because stumbling was easier than resisting. The world around him had dissolved into a confusion of torches, shouting adults. Students pressed against barriers, someone sobbing, someone retching. As Moody shepherded him into the castle, Harry looked once over his shoulder. Dumbledore was with the Diggories. McGonagall was driving students back with sweeping commands. Karkaroff had vanished. The place where Cedric lay was hidden by bodies. Moody's grip tightened. No time for that. They climbed the stone steps in a dizzying rush, their footfalls echoing through corridors that were too empty for the hour. Somewhere a portrait demanded to know what was happening. Moody ignored it. He moved faster and more surely than ever, the wooden legs striking the floor with hard, decisive knocks. His office smelled of dust, leather, and stale drink. The hip flask was on the desk. Moonlight from the window silvered the instruments on his shelves. Moody shut the door, sealed it with a muttered spell, and turned. "Sit down," he said. Harry did not sit. His hand still gripped his wand. "Cedric." Yes. Moody limped toward him. "Dead. Bad luck, that. But not the point." The words made no sense. Harry stared. Moody's magical eye had stopped spinning. It was fixed on Harry with a terrible steadiness. "Tell me," he said, and the tone was no longer the harsh patience of a teacher, but the naked greed of a starving man. "Tell me exactly what happened. He did it? The Dark Lord?" The room seemed to tilt. Harry backed into a table. "How do you know?" Moody laughed. Nothing in Harry's life had prepared him for that sound coming out of that scarred face. There was madness in it, but not the blunt, jagged kind he had half expected from the old Auror. This was delighted, private, almost dainty in its satisfaction, as if some elaborate joke had at last paid off. "Oh, put it together, Potter," he said. "I have spent a year putting everything else together for you." He moved with surprising quickness. Harry raised his wand, but Moody was already talking, spilling words the way a wound spills blood, unable or unwilling to stop. "The cup was a portkey. I made sure of it. I guided you through every damn task, turned crumb at the right moment, kept the path clear when it mattered, fed you clues, protected you from everyone who might spoil the game, and you walked exactly where you were meant to walk, right to him." Harry's mind snagged on one fact and could not get past it. "You?" "Me," Moody said, and with a savage, impatient gesture he snatched up the hip flask and drank deeply. The smell that rolled off him then was not only alcohol. It was something stranger, medicinal, sweet and rotten at once. Polyjuice. Harry's stomach dropped. "You didn't think the real Moody would have been so sentimental, did you?" The man sneered. "Though I learned him well enough. Months in that trunk while I wore his face, listening, learning the gait, the growl, the habits. Very instructive." He took another drink. A bubble seemed to move beneath the skin of his neck. His scarred face shimmered for a second, then settled. Harry could no longer hear the details because one thought beat against all the others, like a trapped bird. Voldemort had not only returned, he had reached Hogwarts. He had been in Harry's classes, in the corridors, within arm's length for a year. The false Moody came toward him, wand raised. "But I'm done explaining. The Dark Lord had plans for you yet. Perhaps he still will if I can." The door exploded inward. Dumbledore entered not like a man opening a door, but like a force of nature deciding that Wood had no further rights. He was followed so closely by McGonagall and Snape that for an instant the office seemed overfull of power. A streak of red shot from Dumbledore's wand before the impostor could turn. Ropes whipped around his chest, throat, knees, pinning him. McGonagall's spell struck next, knocking his wand away. Snape swept the hip flask from his hand with a movement so contemptuous it was nearly elegant. The bound man crashed sideways, hitting the stone floor. His laugh broke off in a snarl. "Severus," Dumbledore said, and the single word carried orders enough. Snape unstopped the flask, sniffed once, and his black eyes flashed. "Polyjuice potion," he said. "Strong, recently taken." Dumbledore knelt beside the captive, and Harry saw then what true anger looked like on that face. It was not loud. It was precise. "Bring Winky and a house elf to the 7-locked trunk," he said to McGonagall without looking up. "The real Alistair Moody is likely inside." McGonagall went at once. The prisoner spat at Dumbledore's robe and missed. "Too late," he hissed. "Perhaps," Dumbledore said, "but not for truth." He sent a jet of clear potion between the man's lips. The captive tried to clamp his mouth shut. Snape caught his jaw in a grip like iron. The potion went down. Almost at once, the scarred face began to melt. It was not a transformation Harry would ever forget. Scar tissue smoothed, then reformed elsewhere. Hair lightened, the nose altered. The magical eye fell from its socket and rolled across the floor with a hideous clatter. The body shrank, the shoulders narrowing, the mouth changing, the whole figure writhing inside Moody's clothing until Barty Crouch Jr. lay bound in it, like an actor half emerged from stolen costume. Harry had seen his photograph in the paper when Sirius had shown him. Even under the potion and the years, there was no mistaking the fanatical bright stare. "Tell us," Dumbledore said. And he did. Under Veritaserum and restraint, his voice came out thin and eager, racing ahead of itself. He spoke of Azkaban, of his mother's sacrifice, of years beneath his father's imperious curse, of Wormtail finding him, of the old man murdered in the Hogwarts grounds and transfigured into a bone buried by Hagrid's cabin. He spoke of stealing hairs from Moody, of the 7-locked trunk, of brewing Polyjuice in secret, of tormenting Neville with the Cruciatus curse, because he could, of guiding Harry by hints and manipulations and Imperius, an accident disguised as fortune. Harry listened from a great distance. Every few sentences some new horror broke through the numbness. Crouch's father dead, Moody imprisoned for a year, Crumb enchanted, the cup altered. And beneath all of it, the fact of Cedric's death sitting in Harry's chest like a stone too large to swallow. Then Crouch said, in the same bright obedient tone, "The Dark Lord is returned, and tonight he takes the ministry." The office went silent. Dumbledore did not move, but something in the room tightened around him. "What do you mean?" Crouch's cracked lips curved in a smile. "He taught me patience." The minister will deny. He always denies. Lucius said so. Avery said so. McNairn knows the lower halls. There are men already turned, offices already watched. The Dark Lord said that fear and routine are the same leash pulled at different times. He said the ministry would still wear its own face by morning. Nay, duh. Harry heard Snape inhale sharply. One of his hands had gone to his left forearm, fingers pressing hard through the sleeve. "The mark," Dumbledore said quietly. "It burns," Snape replied, and though his voice remained controlled, Harry heard strain under it, as one hears a deep current under a calm surface. More strongly than before, Dumbledore rose in a single fluid movement. "Minerva will secure Moody and alert the staff. Poppy is to be told Harry is under my protection. Severus." He looked at Snape, and a whole conversation seemed to pass between them in that look. Warning, trust, necessity, perhaps even farewell. "You know what I ask." "I do." "Then go, when you judge it possible." Crouch laughed again, choked on it, and went on smiling. A minute later, Fudge arrived. He came not alone, but with a Dementor gliding at his shoulder like a fold of rotted cloth given hunger. The temperature of the office dropped at once. Harry recoiled. The thing's hood turned toward him, and memory tore through him so fast and savage that his knees weakened. Dumbledore was between them in an instant, every line of him rigid with fury. "No," he said, and the words struck like a blow. But the Dementor had already sensed what it wanted most in the room, the bound, unstable wizard on the floor. It moved with shocking speed. By the time Dumbledore's silver spell drove it back, its horrible sucking mouth had fixed on Crouch's. The body convulsed. The bright fanaticism vanished from the eyes as if a lamp had been put out inside them. When the creature drifted away, Crouch was alive in the technical sense only. Fudge, who had entered protesting that such precautions were necessary, went pale. I say, Dumbledore, really? If this man was as dangerous as you claim, you have destroyed the only witness beyond Harry, Dumbledore said. And Harry had never heard colder disgust. Fudge bristled out of reflex. He was mad. You cannot expect me to take the word of a deranged youth or a traumatized boy over. Over what? Dumbledore asked. Over a body in your school? Over the dark mark on my spy's arm? Over the testimony of a child who has seen the grave and the cauldron, and the man who killed one student and seeks another? Harry spoke then because if he did not, he thought he might choke. The story came out in fragments at first, then in a hard torrent. Cedric, the graveyard, Pettigrew, the ritual, the Death Eaters, the duel, the shades from the wand, Voldemort's words about the ministry. Fudge listened with the expression of a man being asked to dine on something rotten. He shook his head before Harry had finished. No, he said hoarsely. No, this is nonsense. Delusion. The after effect of terrible shock. The scar on Harry's forehead throbbed as though in answer. Then the green flames in Dumbledore's fireplace leapt high, and from them came a silver lynx, lean and bright as a blade. It spoke in a woman's clipped, urgent voice. Harry did not know. Security breach on levels 1, 2, and 6. Minister required immediately. Auror Office engaged. The Patronus vanished. No one spoke for a second. Fudge's face sagged. It will be some absurd accident, he said. But he sounded already as if he did not believe himself. Some escaped creature. Some prank. Amelia will have it in hand. Perhaps, Dumbledore said. Or perhaps the door has already opened. Fudge drew himself up with the shivering dignity of a man putting on a coat in a storm. I shall go to the ministry at once, he said. And when I return, Dumbledore, I expect sense to have prevailed here. He turned sharply and swept from the office. The Dementor flowed after him. Dumbledore watched the door close. Then he looked at Harry, and all the iron went out of his face for one aching instant, leaving only age and sorrow. Come, he said. There is more to survive before morning. The Ministry of Magic at midnight was not asleep. It was merely pretending to be less awake than it truly was. Cornelius Fudge stepped from the flue into his private fireplace on level 1 with soot on his cuffs and a headache pulsing behind both eyes. The emerald flames spat once and died. His hat had been crushed under one arm for the entire journey. When he remembered to put it back on, it sat askew. Dolores Umbridge emerged behind him in a puff of sweet perfume and ash, clutching 3 folders to her chest as though they were life preservers. Dawlish came last, broad and taut and pink around the gills from the speed of his travel. The minister's office, usually a place that soothed Fudge by the mere fact of belonging to him, looked oddly foreign tonight. The portraits of former ministers on the wall were awake and muttering to one another. The silver-backed chairs by the hearth were empty. A memo had been left on his desk under a paperweight shaped like a griffin, its wax seal broken and resealed in haste. Through the half-open inner door, the outer offices beyond were too brightly lit. "Get me Amelia," Fudge snapped to no one in particular, which was how he often spoke when alarmed. "And Scrimgeour, and I want to know why I am being summoned in the middle of the night over a security breach." Umbridge's soft toad-like voice slid in beside him. "I am sure it is nothing more than agitation after the tournament, Minister. These people in the lower departments are inclined to melodrama. If there were truly anything grave, we should have been informed much earlier." Fudge rounded on her, grateful for someone weaker than himself. "We have been informed. That was the point of the Patronus. Where is Perkins? Where is Weatherby? Why is no one in here?" "No." The answer came not from Umbridge but from the corridor beyond. Raised voices. Running feet. A clerk with blood on his collar hurried past the open door without even glancing in. Fudge felt an old instinctive displeasure at being ignored that had not yet admitted it was fear. He strode out into the antechamber and stopped. The central office of the minister's level was in disarray. Parchments lay scattered in drifts. A filing cabinet had fallen onto its side and spilled folders across the floor like a gutted thing spilling entrails. 3 junior clerks huddled together near the far wall, white-faced and whispering. Percy Weasley stood by a desk with an armful of files pressed to his chest, not because he was carrying them somewhere, but because he had clearly forgotten he was holding them. His carefully parted hair had come loose over his forehead. There was ink on one cheek. "Weasley," Fudge barked. "Report, Dot." Percy started so violently several parchments slid from his grasp. "Minister, sir. I was just coming. I mean, Miss Umbridge sent for the international reports. And then there was a disturbance on level 6, and a message from law enforcement that all fireplaces were to be checked. And then the lift stopped between floors and—" "Breathe, man." "Yes, Minister. Sorry, Minister." Percy swallowed. He was trying very hard to look useful and succeeding only in looking young. "Madam Bones is with Scrimgeour on level 2. There's been a failure in the flu regulation authority. Several fireplaces opened without authorization, and then locked. Internal communications have gone odd. Some of the enchanted memos are repeating old orders. There's also been an unconfirmed sighting of masked intruders near the service passages below level 4. "None at all? Masked intruders?" Fudge repeated, appalled less by the words themselves than by the melodrama of them. "Who reported masked intruders?" "MacDougal from maintenance," Percy said. "But he may have been hexed, sir." Umbridge gave a tiny disapproving click of the tongue. "Maintenance is not a department known for restraint." Fudge was about to retort when the nearest office door opened and Amelia Bones came through with her monocle flashing in the gas lamps. She looked as she always did, broad-shouldered, square-jawed, composed. Yet there was a haste in her stride that made Fudge's pulse jump. Rufus Scrimgeour followed, leonine hair disordered, a slash of soot across one temple, the old scars on his face standing out white. "Minister," Amelia said without preamble, "we have an organized intrusion." Fudge stared at her. "You cannot possibly know that yet." "I know it because 3 access points on 3 different levels were breached within 4 minutes of one another. I know it because the men breaching them knew precisely which fireplaces to hit and which lift shafts to jam. And I know it because one of my officers was imperious in front of me." The last sentence landed harder than the rest. Even Umbridge fell silent. Scrimgeour spoke in the clipped tone of a man whose patience has been replaced by necessity. "We are moving Aurors to levels 1 and 6. If this is a raid, it is not from outside alone. They have support inside the building. Someone opened the lower wards from within." "No?" Fudge's face prickled. "That is ridiculous. No one inside this ministry would." Amelia's eyes met his. "Minister, half the work of politics is teaching people what they can tell themselves while it happens. This is happening." Fudge hated her in that second for being right before he was ready. "How many?" "At least a dozen seen," Scrimgeour said. "Possibly more. Masked. Some moving through corridors, others through fireplaces. We've sealed the visitor entrance and the public phone box. Dawlish has my orders to bring in the reserve teams." "No." Dawlish, who had come to stand in the doorway, nodded once and went. Fudge wiped a damp palm down the front of his robes. "Masked intruders can mean any number of things. Smugglers, disgruntled radicals, goblin sympathizers. This is exactly why I have always maintained a firm administrative line." Amelia's expression did not change. "This is not an administrative problem." Something like irritation flickered in Umbridge's eyes, either at being ignored or at the implication that some crises existed beyond memoranda. "Minister," she said sweetly, "perhaps we should move to a secure office while law enforcement does its work." Before Fudge could answer, all the enchanted candles in the corridor went out at once. For a heartbeat, the ministry became a tunnel of darkness full of startled breathing. Then green fire shot up from 3 fireplaces at the far end of the level. Figures stepped through them in black masks and long robes, not hurrying, not shouting, as if they had every right to enter by the minister's own hearths. The first curse hit the far wall and blew stone inward. Clerks screamed. Percy dropped his files entirely and fumbled for his wand with both hands. "Down!" Scrimgeour roared. The corridor detonated into motion. Red and purple light tore through the dark. Amelia's curse struck one masked intruder full in the chest and threw him back into a desk so hard the wood splintered. Another sent a jet of blue flame across the ceiling, setting hanging memos alight in their hundreds, so that for a surreal second the air filled with burning paper birds. Fudge found himself shoved flat behind a cabinet by Scrimgeour's arm and landed with his hat crushed under him, breathless and furious and terrified. "Get him inside," Amelia shouted. Umbridge was already crawling toward the minister's inner office with surprising speed, dragging one of her folders behind her by its ribbon ties. Percy, who had managed at last to draw his wand, threw a shield charm that held for perhaps half a second before a second curse blew it apart. He was knocked off his feet and slammed against the skirting board, spectacles askew, mouth open in shock. More green fire roared from a second fireplace, and from it, stepping as calmly as if arriving at a dinner invitation, came Lucius Malfoy. He wore a mask, but he removed it with one gloved hand the moment he crossed the threshold. His pale hair spilled over black velvet. His face was bloodless and composed and entirely familiar, which made the scene around him somehow worse. "Minister," he said with a little bow. Fudge stared at him from the floor. "Malfoy?" The office beyond them filled with screams from other levels, echoed and distorted by stone and lift shafts. Somewhere below, metal shrieked. An alarm bell began to toll from deep in the building, then cut off mid-note. Malfoy's eyes, pale and cold as winter sunlight, flicked once to Amelia Bones and then back to Fudge. "I did advise you that disorder follows hysteria," he said. "Unfortunately, we have reached the point where advice is no longer sufficient." "Traitor," Amelia said, and there was no surprise in her voice, only contempt. Malfoy did not so much as look at her. "You always did mistake frankness for disloyalty." A masked wizard emerged behind him with a sweep of brutal authority Harry would have recognized only from hearsay and Fudge from ministry gossip. Walden McNair, executioner's strength thick in his shoulders, wand red at the tip. Another followed, and another. The corridor that only minutes before had been a bureaucratic artery now belonged to men who had come dressed for slaughter. Scrimgeour rose from cover like a striking animal and sent a curse that shattered the marble bust beside Malfoy's head. "Bones, take the minister!" Amelia moved instantly, but the floor beneath them bucked. Not literally. No earthquake shook the ministry. It was the wards changing, doors locking, lifts jamming, fireplaces clapping shut or flinging wide in patterns no defender had chosen. The building knew itself to be under attack and had been taught, somehow, to answer to the attackers. For the first time all night, Fudge felt something colder than ordinary fear. He felt his ministry being used by hands other than his own. The battle for the ministry did not unfold like a siege, with lines and banners and one side visible to the other. It spread instead like poison through a body that only gradually understands its blood has been turned against it. On level 2, the Auror Office became a barricade within minutes. Scrimgeour sent 2 teams toward the lift banks, and another to hold the staircase access while Amelia, still calm in a way that made everyone around her steadier, ordered clerks and hit wizards toward the secure records room. Kingsley Shacklebolt appeared from a side corridor with one sleeve blackened, and reported that level 6 had fallen silent. No messages coming out. Too many fireplaces running green at once. The internal owlery refusing dispatches as though charmed to perch and wait. "Get a Patronus to Dumbledore if you can," Amelia told him. Kingsley's dark face tightened. "If I can get clear enough. Do it anyway." Then the lights went wrong all across level 2. Not out, not in. They flickered from gold to a dim underwater green. Shadows jumped. A masked figure emerged from an interview room where no one should have been and dropped an Auror before anyone saw him move. Scrimgeour killed that attacker with a curse so swift it sounded like a whip crack. The body hit the floor and did not rise. Beside it, a second body did rise. A clerk under Imperius, eyes empty, wand raised at her own colleagues until Tonks stunned her from behind and swore so violently that Dawlish actually flinched. Levels above and below them were bleeding into one another through the lift shafts. Curses flew down iron grills. Smoke climbed. Every few seconds another bell shrilled or stopped. The building seemed full of trapped weather. Fudge saw almost none of that directly. He was hustled between offices. Through corridors he had walked for years without once seeing the danger in their corners, while every instinct in him clamored to retreat to the symbolic safety of his own rooms. That instinct nearly killed him. The first time he tried to wrench free of Amelia's protection to demand answers in his office. A killing curse hit the door where his head would have been, and blew brass hinges clear out of the stone. After that, he stopped trying to lead and began trying merely to remain in the company of people who looked as if they knew what they were doing. Percy stayed with him because no one had given Percy permission to leave, and because there is a kind of courage in the overtrained soul that does not at first recognize itself as courage. His hands shook. His voice shook. But he kept hold of the stack of sealed folders Fudge had barked for at the start of the night, as if official paperwork itself might anchor reality. More than once Fudge found the sight of the young man perversely reassuring. Bureaucracy, even terrified bureaucracy, was still bureaucracy. Umbridge recovered faster than anyone had a right to from the initial attack. She stopped shrieking, smoothed the front of her robes, and began suggesting sensible places to hide. It was almost impressive until one noticed that all the places she suggested placed sturdier men between herself and danger. "Minister," she whispered now, crouched behind a stone pillar while curses scorched the corridor ahead. "We must preserve continuity of governance. If you are injured, there will be panic. If there is panic, control of the narrative may be lost. Control of the..." Fudge stared at her. "They're trying to murder us." She blinked. All the more reason to be careful what is said afterwards. He might have laughed if his mouth were not so dry. A crash like a giant plate smashing reverberated through the level below. Someone shouted that the atrium had been breached. Scrimgeour, passing them at a run, stopped long enough to point his wand at Fudge and Percy both. "Stay here," he said, which was not a request. Amelia did not stop. She was already moving toward the lifts with the hard economy of a soldier who has chosen where she means to stand. Fudge saw blood on one cuff and realized with a start that it was hers. She seemed not to know it. "Bones!" he called. She looked back once. "Bring him alive if you can," she said, and for a moment Fudge thought she meant one of the attackers. Then he understood. She meant himself. Bring the minister alive if possible. The humiliation of it struck him even through the fear. He was the office they were dying to preserve, not the man. By the time they reached the atrium, the golden fountain of magical brethren had been cracked through the middle. Water gushed in glittering sheets over broken stone witches and wizards, over the bent bronze goblin and the fallen centaur, whose severed arm lay in the flood like something actually dead. The polished floor had become slick underfoot. Fires burned in 3 fireplaces at once, each a vertical wound of green light. Ministry employees fled in every direction, some with wands out, some without. A wizard from the Department of Magical Games and Sports was trying futilely to force the visitor entrance grill shut by hand. He died with his fingers on the bars. Rufus Scrimgeour stood on the blackened steps before the fountain, roaring orders while 2 Aurors braced shields on either side of him. His presence had the effect of a wall, not because he was invulnerable, but because he looked as if he had accepted from birth that walls are what men like him become at the necessary hour. Kingsley fought a little way to his left, tall and frighteningly precise. His curses, economical and lethal. Tonks, hair gone iron gray in concentration, dragged the wounded behind a toppled desk and went straight back out. And there, emerging through the green fire of the largest hearth as though the flames themselves had merely been awaiting the honor, came Voldemort. He did not hurry. He did not need an announcement. The sight of him reorganized the room. Even those who had never seen him, and had only heard stories felt what he was before their minds had found the name. The pale face, the red eyes, the black robes that did not so much move as flow around a shape too spare for ordinary flesh. He appeared not like a man entering a battle, but like the principle according to which the battle had already been arranged. Fudge stopped dead. For an insane second he thought of Harry in Dumbledore's office, blood on his sleeve, shouting that Voldemort had returned. He saw again the boy's face in his own refusal. Something cold and perfect opened inside him and would never fully close again. "No," Fudge whispered. Voldemort heard him. Across the wrecked atrium, amid curses and fire and screams, he turned his head and smiled directly at the Minister of Magic. Amelia moved first. She strode out from cover, one hand leaving blood on the marble as she raised her wand. "With me," she barked. 3 Aurors answered. Their spells crossed the space like streaks of artillery, converging on the pale figure by the hearth. Voldemort flicked his wand almost lazily. 2 curses flew harmlessly aside and shattered windows. The third he absorbed on a shield so thin it was nearly invisible. Then his own curse lashed back, not green but a blade-thin line of violent white that struck one Auror squarely and hurled him against the fountain hard enough to break his neck. Amelia did not pause. Her monocle was gone. Her hair had come loose. She looked in that instant like a carved figure of justice suddenly granted life and rage. She drove Voldemort backward 3 steps with a sequence of curses so complex and rapid that Fudge lost track of them after the second. Stone burst around his feet. A serpent of blue fire coiled from the end of her wand and snapped at his face. Voldemort vanished into shadow and reappeared near the shattered fountain, his robes smoking at the hem. For the first time that night, surprise showed plainly on one of the attackers' faces. Malfoy saw it too. His composure tightened. "Enough," Voldemort said softly. The word was not loud, but it spread. Death Eaters shifted position at once. McNair and 2 masked men broke from the flank and drove between Amelia and the minister with brute force and killing curses that forced Scrimgeour's people to react. Kingsley shouted something lost in the noise. Percy, caught in the open near one of the lifts, flattened himself against the grate as a curse took the wall above his head and showered him with stone dust. "Back!" Scrimgeour roared to Fudge. "No!" But Voldemort was already there. Not literally. Not yet. Yet Fudge felt his nearness like cold fingers at the back of his neck. Malfoy had reached him in the confusion. The white-blonde wizard's hand settled on Fudge's elbow with terrible courtesy. "Minister," Malfoy murmured, as if assisting him through a crowded gala. "This would be the moment to preserve yourself." Fudge tried to wrench away and found his limbs heavy, his thoughts thick. Not imperious, not fully. Shock, perhaps. Terror. Or the knowledge that the men around him had attended his dinners, laughed at his jokes, called him Cornelius in private drawing rooms, all while carrying masks for a night like this. "You cannot possibly think," Fudge began. Malfoy's one touched the base of his spine through his robes. "I think," he said softly, "that you have always mistaken comfort for strength. Tonight will cure you." Me. Behind them, Amelia Bones cried out. A sharp, involuntary sound cut off almost at once. Fudge turned his head and saw her on one knee, one hand pressed to her side, still firing curse after curse, upward at the pale figure advancing through the spray of the broken fountain. Voldemort's face was no longer amused. It was intent. That, more than anything, terrified Fudge. He had not expected evil to have to work. "Drop your wand," Voldemort said to her. Amelia answered with a curse that sliced a chunk of marble from the ministerial staircase. Voldemort's wand made a brief downward movement. The green light was small, almost delicate. Amelia Bones fell without ceremony into the floodwater around the broken fountain. The water ran red around her robes, and then clear again as if the building were too vast to care. Scrimgeour's cry of fury seemed to split the atrium. He charged forward with 3 Aurors at his back. Tonks cursed left and right like a duelist in a dream. Kingsley reached Fudge with one sweeping motion, trying to break Malfoy's hold, and almost succeeded. Then McNair crashed into him from the side and both went down in a tangle of robes and striking wands. The next seconds came at Fudge in fragments. Percy shouting, Umbridge sobbing and then instantly stifling it. A masked man with blood across his mask dragging a wounded clerk by the heels. Scrimgeour forced back step by step under a rain of curses. The bronze witch from the fountain toppling at last and smashing apart at Voldemort's feet. The sudden cold as the Dementor Fudge had brought from Hogwarts glided into the Atrium through a fireplace, and then, as though recognizing the new order of things, turned not toward the Death Eaters, but toward the fleeing employees. "Keep them off us!" someone screamed. Patronus light burst silver and stag-shaped, driving the Dementor back for a moment. Kingsley, bleeding from his brow, hurled the message upward and out. Whether it would reach Dumbledore or any ally at all, no one knew. And through it all, Voldemort came nearer, robes untouched by floodwater, red eyes fixed on Fudge with a purpose more appalling than murder. When he stood at last an arm's length away, the Minister of Magic could not make himself lift his wand. "You denied me," Voldemort said. It was not accusation. It was almost wonder. As though he had found a creature too foolish to be fully accounted for in his previous models of the world. Fudge's lips moved. "Hey, you will continue to." The words did not at first make sense. Then Voldemort smiled. An understanding flooded Fudge so fast he nearly vomited. "Not kill me," the smile said. "Use me." Malfoy's pressure on his elbow increased. Umbridge, still on the floor, looked up with wet, bright eyes and already seemed to be calculating how such a night might be survived, not merely intact, but profitably. Scrimgeour was shouting for retreat. The Aurors left standing began dragging the wounded toward the side passages. Kingsley broke free of McNair long enough to send a curse that shattered one of the hearths into smoking brick, buying perhaps seconds. The building no longer belonged to its defenders. They had understood it. Some still fought on out of fury, or loyalty, or simple inability to stop. Others ran. The Ministry did not fall with a single sound. It fell in layers. When Amelia hit the water and did not rise, when Scrimgeour realized he could save survivors but not the Atrium, when the fireplaces stopped answering Ministry command, when the Dementor turned, when the Minister lowered his wand, and when Voldemort laid one white hand on the back of his neck, not to break it but to direct where it should bow. "Take him upstairs," Voldemort said. Fudge found that his legs were obedient after all. Back in Dumbledore's office, the Knight had acquired the strained order of a place that knows catastrophe has occurred, but has not yet decided how much must be admitted aloud. Harry sat in a high-backed chair near the fire because Dumbledore had told him to sit in, because once he discovered that standing again would take more strength than he possessed. Fawkes watched him from the golden perch, brilliant eyes grave. The room smelled of smoke, lemon drops, wet wool, and the faint medicinal sting of the potions Madame Pomfrey had thrust on Harry before being overruled and sent away. His hands would not stop shaking. Sometimes the tremors ran visibly through his fingers. Sometimes they seemed to travel deeper, through muscle and marrow, so that his teeth nearly knocked together. "Cedric is dead," he kept thinking, with the numbness of repetition rather than fresh shock. Cedric is dead, and Amos is somewhere below in the castle with that knowledge in his body now. Dumbledore moved through the office as swiftly and silently as a much younger man. He sent messages by Patronus, by Phoenix, by house elf, by sealed parchment. He woke portraits and made them carry warnings through their painted corridors. He spoke to McGonagall at the door for perhaps 10 seconds, and those 10 seconds altered the whole castle. In the distance, bells rang once, and then stopped. Shutters closed over outer windows. Footsteps multiplied in the passageways as professors took up positions that were part school discipline and part defense. The easy summer quiet of Hogwarts was gone. Snape stood at the edge of the firelight with his left hand hidden in the opposite sleeve, as though even the sight of the dark mark's pain were a private indignity. His face had gone the curious gray of a man both ill and entirely functional. Whatever he was feeling, he had locked it down to such narrow channels that only the slight tightening of his mouth betrayed him. "It is no summons to a graveyard," he said at last. "It is insistent, but not enraged. He wants those he can use immediately." Dumbledore, who was sealing a letter with blue wax, nodded once. "Which makes you more useful alive than dramatic. Go as soon as you can leave without suspicion." Harry looked from one man to the other. The meaning landed slowly. "You're going to him." Snape's gaze flicked to Harry, black and unreadable. "That has always been the arrangement." The words might have stung on another night. Tonight they barely registered. Harry felt only a deep irrational dread at the thought of anyone voluntarily walking toward the thing he had just escaped. The flames in the fireplace surged, and a black dog bounded through them in a shower of sparks before resolving, halfway across the rug, into Sirius Black. He had not bothered with elegance in the transformation. His hair hung dark and ragged around his face. He took one look at Harry and crossed the room in 3 quick strides. "Harry!" Harry rose so abruptly the chair scraped backward. For one terrible moment he thought Sirius might embrace him, and that if he did, something in Harry would break beyond repair. Sirius seemed to think the same because he stopped a foot short and settled instead for gripping Harry hard by both shoulders. The man's hands shook too. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Harry said automatically. Sirius' mouth tightened. "Don't say that to me tonight." The rebuke was gentle, which made it worse. Harry swallowed and looked away. A second figure appeared in the flames. Remus Lupin, coat half-buttoned, eyes dark with sleeplessness and alarm. He moved with his usual self-containment, but Harry saw at once that he had come in haste, leaving tea or papers or perhaps sleep behind somewhere else, in a life that never belonged entirely to safety. "What's happened?" Remus asked. Then he saw Harry's face and the blood on the sleeve and stopped. "Oh," Dumbledore told them quickly. He did not soften any part of it. Cedric's death, Voldemort's rebirth, Crouch Jr., the Patronus from the Ministry, the assault underway. Sirius' expression went savage and still, the old black face in him surfacing through the gaunter lines of Azkaban and exile. Remus closed his eyes once when Cedric's name was spoken, and then opened them again with a weariness that looked like grief remembered from too many old nights. "We'll go," Sirius said at once. "We'll get to the Ministry." "No," Dumbledore said. Sirius took a step forward. "Albus." "No," Dumbledore repeated with more force. "What is happening there is not a battle to which 2 wanted or watched men may usefully add themselves. What I require of you is different and will save more lives." Yeah. It was not often anyone spoke to Sirius in a tone that presumed obedience and got it, but Dumbledore did. Sirius' jaw worked. Then he nodded once. "Remus, you will go to Arabella Figg, Daedalus Diggle, and Mundungus Fletcher. Wake them. Tell them the old channels are open again. Sirius, Hestia Jones and Emmeline Vance, if you can reach them. Avoid any ministry route and any place that makes a show of safety. Hogwarts must remain unaware to the students for as long as possible, but the castle is now an island. We will need boats." "Nay." "The order," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes. There was no ceremony in the word. No triumphant old title restored. Only necessity. "What about the Wesleys?" Harry asked. The question came out before he had thought it. Percy was at the Ministry. Mr. Wesley worked there. Mrs. Wesley would be asleep, perhaps, or perhaps awake with the mother's unease that never quite sleeps while children are scattered. Remus answered, because Dumbledore was writing again. Arthur will be warned if he has not already been drawn in. Molly can be reached through private channels. Nay. Maya. Harry nodded. The room swam a little. He sat down again because the floor had begun to feel unreliable. Snape moved toward the fire. "Severus," Dumbledore said softly. Snape paused. For the first time that night his control cracked enough for a bitter smile. "You need not ask whether I am ready. I have 16 years to prepare for exactly this." He stepped into the flames and was gone. Silence held for perhaps 5 seconds after his departure. Then from somewhere far away, farther than the grounds, nearer than London, came a pressure Harry felt not in his ears, but in his scar. He bent double with a hiss of pain. Dumbledore was at his side immediately. "Harry, Harry pressed shaking fingers to his forehead. "It's like before. Stronger. Look at me." Harry forced his gaze up. "Can you tell what he feels?" Harry wanted to say rage. Voldemort's rage was always there, hot and acid. But this was something mixed with it, something colder and more ordered. Not triumph exactly. Occupation. Arrangement. Satisfaction in pieces fitting where they had been meant to fit. "He's not hunting me," Harry said through his teeth. "He is doing something. Settling things. He's pleased." The last word made the office colder. Dumbledore's expression altered very slightly. He believed Harry. He always believed him. The certainty of that nearly undid Harry more than sympathy would have done. Sirius crouched in front of him. "Harry, listen to me. You did the impossible tonight. You came back. Cedric didn't." The words came out flat. No tears. No break. That was what made them so awful. Sirius closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "No," he said. "He didn't." Harry looked at his own blood drying dark on his sleeve. "He told me to bring him back. In the graveyard. His ghost, or whatever it was. He asked me to bring his body to his parents." He swallowed. "I did, but I don't know if that's enough." Nothing in the room could answer. Fawkes gave a low musical cry that sounded like mourning shaped into song. The door opened without a knock. McGonagall stood there, straighter than any grief-stricken woman had a right to stand. "The school is secured. The champions' delegations are confined to their quarters. Karkaroff has disappeared." "No." "Of course he has," Sirius muttered. McGonagall's eyes went to Harry, softened for an instant, then returned to Dumbledore. "We have 2 wounded from the grounds in confusion only. Nothing more. The Diggerays." She stopped, and in that stop Harry heard the limit of her strength. "They are with Madame Pomfrey and Professor Sprout." Dumbledore inclined his head once in gratitude and acknowledgement. Then another silver shape burst from the fireplace, a lynx again, running soundlessly through the air before halting above the rug. This time the voice was male, low and controlled, and breathless beneath control. "Shacklebolt to Dumbledore. Atrium lost. Bones down. Minister taken alive. Scrimgeour withdrawing survivors through court levels. Ministry wards compromised from within. Repeat. Minister taken alive." The Patronus dissolved. No one spoke. Sirius swore in a whisper that sounded like prayers in verse. Remus drew a hand over his face. McGonagall actually took one step back as though the floor had shifted. Harry felt his stomach drop into cold emptiness. Taken alive. He remembered Voldemort in the graveyard saying he preferred a frightened mouthpiece to a corpse. Dumbledore was the only one who did not visibly react. Yet Harry, watching him closely, saw the devastating truth of the message settle behind those blue eyes. It was not merely that the Ministry had been attacked. It was that the attack had aimed not at chaos but control. "Then the board is clearer than I had hoped," Dumbledore said quietly. "To you, perhaps," Sirius said. "To the rest of us it looks damned foggy." "It means," Dumbledore replied, "that Cornelius will speak tomorrow, and what he says may wear his voice without being his will. It means every official channel becomes suspect as of this hour. It means Hogwarts must be defended not only from open enemies, but from any decree bearing the Ministry seal. And it means that whatever remained of peacetime is over." Harry thought of the school around them, full of sleeping students who had spent the year worrying about homework and dates to a dance, and whether Hagrid could teach, and who had won points for their house. Over. The word seemed too small. Dumbledore put one hand lightly on Harry's shoulder. "You are not to leave this office tonight unless I tell you," he said. "Not for any voice at the door. Not for any message, however official. Do you understand?" Harry nodded. Then, because he was 14 and exhausted and had been asked all night to carry more than 14-year-olds were made for, he said in a voice that sounded much younger than his own, "Will he come here?" Dumbledore's hand remained steady. "Yes," he said, "but not tonight." Severus Snape entered the conquered ministry by a route no clerk would ever have known existed. It began in a disused flue spur beneath Nocturne Alley, descended through a maintenance shaft stinking of ash and rat droppings, and ended behind an ornamental panel in a committee room on level 1 where generations of officials had sat through discussions of budgetary matters without suspecting the wall beside them could open. The passage had been built in another age for emergencies involving the minister. Tonight it delivered a spy to a tyrant. Snape emerged into smoke. The committee room beyond had been stripped of pretense by violence. One end of the long polished table was splintered. There were scorch marks on the corniced ceiling. A wizard in ministry green lay face down by the door with the stillness of the recently dead. Somewhere beyond the walls, boots ran on stone and then stopped abruptly. The air smelled of burned parchment, potion smoke, and blood. Snape's left forearm burned with the dark mark summons as steadily now as a second pulse. He adjusted his sleeve over it, smoothed his expression into respectful neutrality, and stepped into the corridor. The ministry was not in chaos anymore. That, more than the wreckage, told him how bad matters were. Chaos has a sound, a loudness, a confusion, a multiplicity of competing human wills. Here the loudness had passed. What remained was direction. Masked men stood at intersections with wands out, not because they were still fighting, but because they had already taken the ground. Doorways were charmed shut in patterns recognizable to anyone with Snape's knowledge of old dark magic. Not broad ceiling spells improvised in desperation, but layered locks meant to channel movement where a commander desired. 2 bodies were being levitated away by clerks whose faces were gray with shock and absolute obedience. On the wall, an official notice board had been cleared and recovered with fresh parchment, as if administration itself had survived the battle and simply changed masters. McNair waited outside the minister's office with blood drying on his jaw and one sleeve burned through. He looked Snape over with the heavy amusement of a man who enjoys violence more when it comes after suspense. "Well, well," McNair said. "The prodigal professor." Snape's expression did not alter. The summons took time to answer. Hogwarts contains a number of observant people. McNair grinned. "He'll decide whether that excuse keeps your head on." "I look forward to his judgment," Snape said. McNair's grin faltered by a hair. It always did. Snape knew when one refused to offer the fear men like McNair hoped to smell. He banged once on the office door and opened it without waiting. The minister's room had become a throne room by the simple expedient of being occupied by someone who had no need to announce himself king. Fudge sat in his own chair behind his own desk, yet the posture was not his anymore. His hands rested flat on the blotter as though he had placed them there deliberately to keep them from shaking. His face had taken on a mottled, stunned look. There was blood at one cuff, none of it apparently his. Behind him, the curtains over the windows had been drawn back to reveal a sliver of London sky beginning to gray toward dawn. Umbridge sat to one side with a quill poised over a sheet of parchment. Not a hostage, then, or not only one. Her small eyes shone with terror lacquered over by usefulness. She looked at Snape with quick, intelligent distaste, then returned her attention to the page as if she already understood that the future would depend on writing the right sentence before another ambitious coward did. Lucius Malfoy stood by the mantel, elegant even with soot on his boots. Avery lingered near the door with his head bowed. The room smelled faintly of expensive perfume where Umbridge sat, but under it lay cold sweat and the sweeter, fouler note of curses recently cast. And Voldemort was by the window, one hand clasped behind his back, studying the city as though deciding which parts of it to let continue. Snape advanced 3 paces and knelt. "My lord." "Severus." The voice was almost mild. That made it worse. Snape kept his gaze lowered to the hem of the black robe, and saw reflected there the paling line of dawn on the window glass. "You were absent when I called my servants to me in the graveyard." "Yes, my lord." "And yet here you are." "Yes, my lord." Silence stretched. Snape could feel Malfoy listening with every nerve in his body. Umbridge's quill had stopped scratching. "Explain," said Voldemort. Snape lifted his head only enough for respect to read clearly and challenge not at all. "I remained at Hogwarts because departure at the instant of your return would have destroyed the position I have maintained for you for years. Dumbledore did not let me out of his sight for long after the boy came back. The dark mark burned. I understood. I waited until I could leave without closing forever the only door into his counsels that remains open to you." "Nay." Voldemort turned from the window. The red eyes settled on Snape's face with such concentrated attention that many men would have sweated under it. Snape had sweated under worse and learned to leave no sign where it could be counted. He offered the truth trimmed for use, that Dumbledore trusted him, that he had been near Harry, that the school had been thrown into confusion, that he had come as quickly as prudence allowed. Around those stones he built other stones. Not lies, precisely. Architecture. "And Dumbledore?" Voldemort asked. "What does he know?" "That you live. That you used the boy's blood. That Barty Crouch Jr. delivered Potter to you and was then captured. That the Ministry was attacked before the Minister could absorb what he had heard at Hogwarts. Does he know the Ministry is mine?" Snape let the smallest pause exist. "He knows enough to suspect." Voldemort smiled. "Good. Suspicion is a form of helplessness when others demand proof." He drifted back toward the desk. Fudge flinched despite himself. The flinch did not escape Voldemort's notice, and some private amusement touched his mouth. "You see, Severus," Voldemort said, "our dear minister has always served me by accident. Fear made him deny me before he saw me. Fear will make him deny me after. The public need not yet be educated in the full shape of their government's new arrangements. They will be told that a deranged criminal from Hogwarts precipitated unrest, that certain old families and certain old radicals sought to exploit it, and that calm authority has prevailed. They will hear the boy is unstable with grief. They will hear Dumbledore has grown reckless. They will be grateful for paperwork." Ew. Fudge's fingers twitched on the blotter. "I never." Voldemort laid one white hand lightly on the minister's shoulder. Fudge's mouth closed. "Speak when invited," Voldemort said. "Yes," Fudge whispered. Umbridge bent over her parchment with renewed energy. Snape saw enough from where he knelt to make out phrases. Unprecedented security incident, regrettable fatality during tournament aftermath, irresponsible rumors. Her script was round and girlish and hideous. "My lord," Malfoy said, "the prophet will print whatever statement bears the minister's seal by breakfast if it is delivered within the hour." "It will be delivered," Voldemort said. "And the Wisengamot?" "Leaderless at present," Malfoy replied. "Frightened. Several members are already requesting private assurances. Give them none yet. Let them stew. Men cling to the first authority that answers after a night like this." Voldemort's gaze returned to Snape. "As for Hogwarts, Dumbledore will move to fortify it. He will remember old names, old loyalties. That is acceptable. I prefer my enemies clustered where they may be studied." "Nah." The implication landed with quiet horror. Hogwarts was not beneath Voldemort's notice. It had become a target to be cultivated. "You will return there," Voldemort said. "Remain in Dumbledore's confidence. Tell him only what keeps that confidence whole. Report to me by the means we established. Should the school become inaccessible, there are other channels. You understand." "I understand, my lord." "And the boy?" Snape let no flicker cross his face. "Alive. Traumatized. Convinced naturally that the world will believe him." The smile that met that was ice cold. "Then by all means let him speak. Truth from the wrong mouth is one of the surest tools of governance." Fudge closed his eyes briefly. as if even now he wished to deny the literal voice saying these things in his office. When he opened them again, he looked years older. "There will be questions," he said to no one and everyone. "From international offices, from the schools, from—" "Answer them," Voldemort said. "I cannot simply say nothing happened." "Of course not. You will say precisely what happened in the form most useful to me." "No." Umbridge lowered the first completed sheet and looked up. "Minister, if I may, it would be wise to announce a temporary expansion of educational oversight and school communications protocols. Children are particularly vulnerable to panic and uncontrolled correspondence from Hogwarts." Voldemort turned his head and regarded her. Under that look, Umbridge actually blushed. Not from shame, from the ghastly excitement of being noticed by power. "You are useful," Voldemort said. Her smile trembled into being. "I am honored to serve order." Snape thought, with a private nausea he did not allow near his face, that there are kinds of cruelty to which grand evil need only provide weather. Petty tyrants bloom of themselves. A knock sounded outside. McNair opened the door enough to mutter that several surviving Aurors had escaped through the lower courts, and one of the Dementors had slipped restraints to feed. Voldemort waved a hand as if these were details of catering. Let the Dementors taste what fear they find. Post men at every legal access point. No owl leaves uninspected. "None, Abazai." "Yes, my lord." When the door shut again, Voldemort looked back at Snape. "Rise." Snape rose. "I do not forgive delays lightly," Voldemort said. "I know it. Yet I find that I prefer an agent inside Dumbledore's walls to a corpse with good intentions." He stepped close enough that Snape could smell the cold cauldron tang of his new body, potion, and grave earth, and the faint metallic note of Harry Potter's blood. "Do not mistake utility for trust. I never have." "Excellent." Voldemort's fingers brushed Snape's sleeve where the dark mark lay. Pain lanced through Snape's arm, white and immediate, but he did not move. The touch withdrew. "Go." Snape bowed and backed away the proper number of steps before turning. As he reached the door, Fudge spoke again, perhaps unable to stop himself. "Severus," he said hoarsely. Snape paused. For a moment the two men looked at one another across the wreckage of office and government. Fudge's gaze contained pleading, shame, disbelief, and the stubborn residue of authority that could not quite accept its own irrelevance. Snape understood at once what the minister wanted. Witness, perhaps, or confirmation that some remnant of the old world still existed if a Hogwarts master could see him like this. Snape gave him nothing. He left the office to the sound of Umbridge beginning to read aloud the statement that would go to press. Dawn came to Hogwarts with a kind of indecency. The sky over the mountains paled from iron to pearl. The black lake turned from ink to dim silver. Birds began in the eaves outside the hospital wing as if summer had not just been split down the middle. Somewhere far off an early riser among the students laughed at something before the sound cut off under a teacher's command. Morning, which usually softened things, seemed instead to outline them more cruelly. Harry had not slept. At some point, Dumbledore had permitted him to move from the office to a bed in the hospital wing under guard, if one could call the combined presence of Madame Pomfrey McGonagall and the headmaster's own instructions merely guard. He had allowed that because Harry could no longer sit upright without trembling, and because the castle, though closed, still had rhythms to preserve. Or perhaps because grief is easier to watch when the body is made to lie down. Ron and Hermione arrived the instant they were allowed, both half-dressed in whatever they had snatched on in haste. Ron's hair stood up in 3 directions, and he had one sock inside out. Hermione's plaid was barely a plaid at all. Each of them looked as though they had run through the castle pursued by fire. They stopped at the foot of Harry's bed. For a second, none of them spoke. Harry saw on their faces the same stunned calculation everyone else had made since midnight. Blood, cut sleeve, hollow eyes, alive. The fact of him alive among the other facts was not simple. Then Hermione reached him first. She sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand so carefully it was worse than if she had burst into tears. Ron sat on the other side with less care and more urgency, as if proximity itself might help. "We heard," Ron began, then stopped. "They won't tell us anything properly," Hermione said. Her voice was controlled to within an inch of breaking. "They only said Cedric Diggory was killed, and you were with Dumbledore, and there had been an incident." Harry looked from one to the other. He had told the story several times already. To Dumbledore, to Sirius and Remus, to McGonagall and clipped verification when she needed facts. But somehow this telling frightened him more. Perhaps because Ron and Hermione were the people among whom he had still, until last night, been allowed to remain partly a schoolboy. "He's back," Harry said. Ron went very still. Hermione's fingers tightened around Harry's hand. "Voldemort." Harry nodded. He told them as much as he could bear to tell. Not every detail. Not the smell of the cauldron or the exact shape of Cedric's body hitting the ground. Not yet. But enough. The Porky, the graveyard, Pettigrew, the ritual, the duel, the Death Eaters, the return. As he spoke, Ron's ears went red with fury and horror. Hermione's face emptied of color until her freckles stood out like flecks of gold dust. "And the Ministry?" she asked when he had finished. "Professor McGonagall said there was some kind of attack in London. Is it connected?" Harry closed his eyes briefly. The question seemed impossible to answer because the truth sounded too much like nightmare. "Yes," he said. "He planned it. He said Fudge would deny he was back, and that while he denied it..." Harry swallowed. "That while he denied it, they'd take the Ministry." Ron stared. "Take it? Just like that?" Harry looked at him. "I don't think it was just like that." Footsteps approached at speed. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway with Arthur Weasley behind him. For an instant, Ron saw only his father and sprang up. Then he saw the rest of him. Arthur's robes were torn at the shoulder and blackened with soot. His glasses sat crooked on a face gray with exhaustion. There was a bandage around one forearm and another hastily charmed patch over his temple. He looked not gravely injured, but profoundly shaken in a way Harry had never seen. Arthur, to Harry, had always seemed woven from curiosity and kindness, and a sort of practical decency that the wizarding world somehow had not managed to corrode. Seeing fear in him was like seeing fear in a hearth. "Mom," Ron blurted. "She's safe," Arthur said at once. And then, because he was a father first even now, he crossed straight to Ron and gripped the back of his neck with a hand that trembled only once. "Your mother is safe. Ginny, Fred, George, all safe. Percy is..." He looked away for the first time. "Percy is still at the Ministry." Ron's face changed. "Still there?" "Last seen on level 1 before dawn. They're accounting for survivors." Arthur turned toward Harry then, and all at once the man's exhausted eyes filled with something close to tears. "Harry, Dumbledore told me you came back with Cedric. I'm so sorry." Harry could not answer. Arthur's grief was not only for Cedric. It was for Harry too, and for his own son somewhere in the seized Ministry, and for whatever version of the country he had believed in yesterday. "I was called in after the first breach," Arthur said, "because perhaps facts were easier. There were irregularities in charmed fireplaces and then reports of cursed Muggle artifacts as diversions. Red herrings, mostly. By the time I got there, the lower levels were already..." He stopped, gathering himself. "Scrimgeour got a number of us out through the old Wizengamot access. Kingsley, too. Amelia didn't make it." Ron swore softly under his breath. Hermione closed her eyes. "And Percy?" she asked. Arthur rubbed at his face with the heel of one hand. No firm word, only that he was seen in the minister's offices when the attackers took level 1. Harry remembered Percy in the corridor from years of stationing himself behind rules as if they could become armor. He could not fit that Percy into the image of masked Death Eaters and Voldemort's hand on Fudge's neck. Yet perhaps that was the point. The Ministry had been taken by men who understood how many harmless lives could be trapped inside structures built to feel ordinary. Dumbledore came farther into the room. He had changed robes sometime before dawn, though Harry could not remember when. The fresh set were a sober gray-blue, unadorned. The simplicity made him look more formidable rather than less. He carried several folded newspapers under one arm. His mouth was a straight line. "They have moved quickly," he said. He handed Arthur one paper and laid another on Harry's blanket. It was an emergency broadside from the Daily Prophet, clearly printed in desperate haste. The headline ran across the top in enormous type: "Ministry quells night of panic after tournament tragedy." Below it, in smaller print and a tone of nauseating reassurance, came the official account. There had been an unfortunate fatality associated with the aftermath of the Triwizard Tournament. A dangerously unstable criminal at Hogwarts had spread wild rumors regarding you-know-who, causing unrest among certain already agitated elements. The Minister of Magic had personally overseen a successful security response to a coordinated disturbance by unidentified extremists. Citizens were urged to remain calm, avoid spreading misinformation, and report any unusual correspondence from Hogwarts directly to Ministry channels. Harry read the paragraph 3 times before the letters ceased to slide. "They're saying I made it up," he said. Ron snatched the paper. "They're saying you caused it." Hermione took it from Ron and scanned downward faster. Her eyes widened with an anger so clean it looked almost serene. "There's more. They're advising temporary monitoring of owl post from school-aged witches and wizards. They're recommending all educational institutions cooperate with Ministry inquiry teams." She looked up. This was prepared by someone thinking about control, not just damage. "Yes," Dumbledore said. Arthur sank onto a nearby chair. "Fudge signed it?" "He did," Dumbledore replied. "Whether with full freedom of will I cannot yet say, but the result is the same. Official authority now serves those who attacked it." Ron looked from the paper to Dumbledore. "So what do we do?" It was a child's question, though Ron did not sound like a child asking it. Harry saw Dumbledore hear both things at once. "We do what people have always had to do when institutions fail before admitting they have failed," Dumbledore said. "We tell the truth carefully. We gather those who can be trusted personally, not merely professionally. We defend what can still be defended, and we refuse to let fear dictate the terms of our obedience." Arthur gave a tired, humorless huff that might have been agreement. "Easier in castles than in office blocks." "Perhaps," Dumbledore said, "but easier still with allies in both." Madame Pomfrey swept in at that moment with a tray of potions and a determination that might have routed lesser evil all by itself. She drove everyone back from Harry's bed, including Dumbledore with only the faintest hesitation, and began ordering Harry to drink, swallow, sleep, and stop looking as though he intended to hold up the world by glaring at it. He drank because resistance required planning, and he had none left. The dreamless potion was mild, not enough to force sleep if the mind resisted. He remained stubbornly awake, listening to the room around him blur and sharpen. Arthur and Dumbledore spoke in low voices by the window about safe houses, private flu connections, and names Harry only half knew. Ron argued to be included in something and was denied. Hermione asked for copies of the newspaper and was also denied, which meant only that she would obtain them by other means within the hour. Outside in the corridor, students were being told breakfast would be delayed, then that breakfast would be sent to houses, then that all students were to remain under supervision. Rumor was already running faster than truth. At one point, Harry turned his head and found Dumbledore looking at him. The look was not pity. It was deeper and more burdensome than pity. Recognition, perhaps, not only of what Harry had suffered, but of what he now knew. When the others had been shepherded a little farther away by Pomfrey's outrage, Dumbledore came and sat for a moment in the chair Arthur had vacated. "The paper is lying," Harry said. "Yes." "Fudge is helping him." "Yes." Harry looked at the white ceiling of the hospital wing. "Then he's won." Dumbledore was quiet for long enough that Harry turned his head again. "No," Dumbledore said. "He has taken a throne hidden behind a clerk's desk and called it victory. That is dangerous. It is not the same as permanent." Harry did not know whether to believe that. He wanted to. Belief, however, felt suddenly more expensive than it had yesterday. "Cedric's father will blame me," he said. Dumbledore's face altered. "Amos Diggory blames the one who killed his son. He is also in more pain than language can presently hold. Be slow to interpret any parent's grief through your own guilt." "None." Harry pressed his lips together. "He will come for this school," he said after a while. "Yes. And the ministry will help him." Dumbledore folded his hands over the head of his walking stick. "The ministry is not a single man, Harry, nor a single building. Some within it remain brave. Some are trapped. Some will bend. Our difficulty now is that the brave may be made to wear the livery of the bent until they can break free." "Nine." Harry thought of Percy somewhere in that building, of Kingsley sending a patroness through smoke, of Arthur arriving soot-covered at dawn, of Amelia Bones in the water beneath the broken fountain, though Harry had not seen it, only knew it now from the room's silence when Arthur had spoken her name. "Then we're already at war," he said. Dumbledore did not contradict him. At 8 o'clock that morning, Cornelius Fudge addressed the press from a room 1 floor below his office, because the official briefing chamber upstairs still smelled too strongly of curses and blood. He stood behind a polished lectern bearing the ministry seal. A charmed backdrop had been hastily repaired so that the cracked edges of last night's damage did not show in the frame. 2 clerks from magical maintenance had worked through dawn to remove scorch marks from the visible walls. The result was almost convincing if one had never seen what elegance looks like before it panics. Reporters from the Daily Prophet, the Wizarding Wireless, and several international desks crowded the rows of chairs with ink-stained hands and sharpened curiosity. They had been woken before dawn by urgent owls marked ministerial priority. They had arrived expecting scandal. What they found was something stranger. Too many Aurors at the doors, too many fireplaces under guard, too many officials with the fixed expressions of people repeating instructions word for word, lest any syllable cost them more than employment. Fudge looked dreadful. He had been cleaned, re-robed, and given tea he had not drunk. None of it had put color back into him. There was a tremor in his left hand that he controlled only by gripping the lectern with both. His eyes had the inflamed brightness of a man whose night had been spent staring too long at things he cannot integrate into the order of the world. Yet when he began to speak, his voice was recognizably the minister's voice. Pompous, anxious to soothe, brittle where it imagined itself firm. "There was," he said, "last night, an unfortunate series of disturbances following the regrettable death of student Cedric Diggory during the final stage of the Triwizard Tournament." Quills scratched at once. "At this time, the ministry has no evidence whatsoever to support irresponsible rumors concerning the return of you-know-who. Those rumors appear to have been exacerbated by the influence of a deranged criminal recently discovered at Hogwarts, and by the understandable shock experienced by certain students present after the threat." A hand shot up near the front. "Minister, are you referring to reports that Harry Potter named—" "The boy is traumatized," Fudge said too quickly. Then he seemed to hear himself and moderated the tone by force. "Any statements made in such a condition must be treated with care. Albus Dumbledore, whose judgment in school matters I have long respected, may unfortunately have been misled by the extremity of the evening's events. Not wholly a lie, not wholly his own sentence. The shape of coercion is often built from available truths bent until they lock. In the shadow beyond the lighting charms, unseen by the assembled reporters, Voldemort stood between 2 columns with his hands folded behind his back and watched. He wore no mask. He had no need of one here. The room belonged to his secrecy, not his revelation. Malfoy stood a little behind him, expressionless. Umbridge sat at a side table with supplementary notes, and looked almost maternally pleased each time Fudge landed on the approved phrase. McNair remained by the back door, an executioner forced for once into the duller labor of standing still. The air around Voldemort was colder than the room's enchantments accounted for. A second reporter stood. "What of the attack inside the ministry itself, Minister? Was it connected to Hogwarts? There are reports of casualties." An attempted exploitation of public agitation by unidentified extremist elements, Fudge recited, is swiftly contained, thanks to the efficiency of the Ministry's emergency protocols and our brave security personnel. Full administrative continuity has been maintained. Administrative continuity. The phrase had been umbrageous. It rolled across the room like a joke told at a funeral and taken down earnestly by every quill. And Madame D'Amelia Bones, another voice called. We have heard she is missing. Fudge stopped. For one perilous second his eyes shifted, not to the reporters, but fractionally toward the shadowed space where Voldemort stood. His mouth opened on nothing. There was in that instant a chance, a tiny, impossible chance, that he might break. That he might speak the truth because truth would at least be his own act, even if it killed him. Voldemort's fingers moved once in the dark. Fudge's face changed. The hesitation flattened into public grief. Madame Bones died in the line of duty during last night's disturbance, he said. Her service to this ministry will be honored. A murmur spread through the room. Even those who loved power more than people knew what Amelia Bones represented. Competence. Severity. The possibility that law might occasionally mean something cleaner than influence. Her death altered the weather. Given the spread of malicious rumors, Fudge went on, voice steadier now because he had passed the point of rebellion and entered the familiar misery of performance, temporary measures will be enacted to protect public confidence and prevent panic, particularly in educational institutions. The ministry requests full cooperation from Hogwarts School and all private households with school-aged witches and wizards regarding correspondence, monitoring, and travel restrictions until the present climate of uncertainty is resolved. Nani. At the side table, Umbridge smiled down at her parchment, already drafting enforcement language. Far away, on a tower high above Hogwarts, Harry stood beside Dumbledore and watched owls' arrows southward through the washed gray morning. He had slept at last for less than an hour, and woken feeling as though rest were something his body had mistaken for surrender. The hospital wing had become unbearable with its white linen and whispered concern. Dumbledore had taken him up to the astronomy tower after breakfast was refused by most of the school and pushed around plates by the rest. From there, the grounds fell away in green distances, and the castle's high stones held the early chill. The world beyond them seemed deceptively clear. Hills, Lake Gardois, forest, sky, England unchanged. England altered beyond repair. Below, tiny figures moved across the lawns under teacher supervision. Durmstrang students clustered like dark birds by the ship at the lake edge. Beauxbaton's carriages stood ready. Somewhere in the grounds, near a row of birches, Cedric Diggory's parents were being led to a waiting ministry carriage that had arrived under official seal and armed escort. Harry had seen the glint of it from above and looked away so quickly his neck hurt. Dumbledore leaned on the stone parapet, beard stirring in the wind. He had said little since bringing Harry up. For once, silence from him did not feel withholding. It felt like respect for scale. Do you think people will believe him? Harry asked at last. Some will, Dumbledore said. Even after the paper, even after Fudge says. Cornelius Fudge is not the measure of all belief. Harry watched the owls vanish into the south. But he's the ministry. Dumbledore's hands tightened, very slightly on the stone. He is the face of it, he said. Last night that became a more dangerous distinction than before. Harry turned the words over. The face of it. Not the whole of it. Yet faces were how institutions spoke to those outside them. Harry knew that much now. If Fudge denied, the prophet would print. If the prophet printed, half the country would read relief into lies, because relief was easier than terror, and because ordinary life is a narcotic people defend with righteous fury. He said this would happen, Harry said. In the graveyard, he said Fudge would hear the truth and deny it. He sounded. Harry searched for the word and hated that he found it. Prepared. Yes, Dumbledore said. Then he planned all of this before he came back. Yes. Harry gripped the parapet until his knuckles whitened. How do we fight someone who knows what people will do before they do it? Dumbledore looked out over the grounds for a long moment before answering. By remembering that prediction is not omniscience, he said. Voldemort is very good at understanding fear, ambition, vanity, resentment, the appetite for safety at other people's expense. He is less good at understanding love when it acts without witness, loyalty without reward, courage in the unimportant, decency in those who do not consider themselves remarkable. Such things are harder to schedule. They ruin plans. Harry would once have found that comforting. This morning it sounded less like comfort than instruction. A map not to victory but to the only route that remained human. Down in London, far beneath the city's roofs in smoke, the press conference ended. Reporters hurried to fireplaces and owls with approved phrases clutched in ink-wet hands. In the corridors outside, department heads were being called into offices where they would be offered reassurance, promotion, threats, enchantment, or death according to temperament and usefulness. In one secure room, a list of households suspected of loyalty to Dumbledore was already being compiled from old memoranda and social records. In another, Azkaban transfer procedures were quietly amended. On level 6, charmed logs were rewritten to show breaches that had never occurred and conceal those that had. The machinery of state, once convinced it still served itself, began the laborious miracle of collaborating in its own abduction. Fudge returned from the briefing to his office and found Voldemort waiting by the window. No audience now. No Malfoy. No Umbridge. Only the minister and the man who had taken from him even the dignity of disbelief. "You did well," Voldemort said. Fudge made a sound that was not gratitude. He sank into his chair because his legs would no longer hold him. The office had been repaired further since dawn. New glass shone in the window panes. A house elf had removed the last obvious bloodstains from the carpet. The neatness was obscene. "You cannot keep this," Fudge whispered. "People will know." "Some already know," Voldemort said. "Knowledge is not the same as effective resistance." Fudge pressed one hand over his eyes. "Why me?" Voldemort considered. "Because you are useful in precisely the way you have always most wished to be valued. You represent normalcy to people who cannot bear to imagine its absence. They will believe your voice longer than they would believe mine. By the time your voice ceases to comfort them, the necessary positions will be occupied." "None. Fine." Fudge lowered his hand and stared at him. "And then, Voldemort said, "we will see whether Britain prefers fear honestly named or fear in administrative robes." He left the office without another word. At Hogwarts, the wind shifted. It carried the scent of wet grass and owl feathers and, faintly, breakfast porridge from some lower window. Harry looked over the battlements toward the far invisible line where London lay and knew with a certainty beyond argument that the country on the other side of that horizon still had a ministry and yet no longer possessed its government. He thought of Cedric taking the cup beside him because fairness mattered. He thought of Amelia Bones he had never known well, but whose name now moved through whispered conversations with the reverence given to the newly dead and the very brave. He thought of Percy trapped in offices where paper could become chains, of Arthur with soot in the lines of his face, of Sirius and Remus gone out into a morning that had no right to ask more of them and asked anyway. He thought of Snape walking into enemy halls because Dumbledore had asked it, and because hatred and duty, once braided, cannot always be untangled without blood. He thought of the graveyard, and the voice saying by dawn Britain would still have a ministry. The genius of the thing, if evil may be said to possess genius, was not that it had destroyed the old order in a blaze. It was that it had let the old order stand and hollowed it from within, leaving the signboard in place so that frightened people might pass beneath without noticing the rot overhead until the roof fell. Dumbledore turned from the parapet at last. "Come," he said. "There are letters to write and names to remember." Harry followed him down from the tower. Below them the castle stirred under its first day of war, and beneath London the bells of the ministry marked the hour for a government that still breathed, still spoke, still issued decrees in its accustomed voice, and had already died.